So you may remember last time when we were working on the car, we were working on oil fittings and things, and this time we're going to install the hose between them all. So come along, this one's going to be fun. So, I don't know if you remember, but last time we were working on the oil fittings, oil cooler and the thermostat for it. So let me give you a quick refresher on where we ended up last time. Here's the oil cooler right in front. There's the two fittings here that'll come around, come underneath and up into the thermostat here. And you can see I've mounted it at sort of an angle. One fitting will come out of the thermostat here and run into the block. And the other fitting here is a 90-degree, kinks upwards and goes up that way. So if we go up, there's the fitting and the thermostat comes up, and there's our relocated oil filter. And so now it's time to finish off the hoses. So I've got my nice fancy, this was like $150 I think for about 3 meters of hose, so it's fairly expensive stuff, but it should be really good quality. It's time to just run it all between all of the bits and pieces that we've got here. It should be a fairly easy job, fairly quick to do. So let's get to it. Now before we go and install the lines, there's an important thing we do need to remember, and that is flow direction through the filter and also out of the block. Because obviously there's 2 ports here, there's obviously also 2 ports out of the block, which are a little tricky to see, but they're under there. And these 2 ports, one is in and one is out, and you need to know which one you're getting, otherwise you're going to have oil flow potentially going the wrong way out of the block and not going through the filters and through other things properly in the right direction. So easiest way to remember is the oil comes in on the outside edge of the filter. You can see this port is more central and this port is more to the edge. So this port comes in and then it comes out through the center, and that's on the filter side. So on the block side we will go in to the center and the oil is going to come out of the outside edge. And so the sandwich plate like we've got here, that this adapter that also exists on the block, it's the same deal. One of these sort of things where one port is slightly offset to the outside and one port is slightly closer to the center. So that's important to remember before we start running our lines, because you don't want to get them all mixed up. You could sort of confuse things a little, and that's not ideal. Oh yeah, and by the way, it doesn't hurt to mark them with a, well obviously I did it kind of dodgy, but with a pen. It makes things easier for the future when you're trying to work out which way flow is flowing. You get what I'm saying. Anyway, it's a good idea to do things like this, just saves headaches in the future. So I thought I'd go and visualize the lines before I go and actually make them, just to be 100% sure on where I'm going from what to what. So we've obviously got the engine, the oil filter, the thermostat and the cooler. And I've marked with little arrows the flow directions. So as I mentioned, the offset is out from the engine and the offset here is in to the oil filter. The oil thermostat, we've got an engine side and a coolant side, or a cold side, and then the cooler, its ports don't matter at all. So we're going to obviously come out of the engine into the filter, out of the filter into the thermostat, and then this will obviously route back to the engine. Now that would be your cold flow, and then obviously as the thermostat opens up for hot flow, then coolant will flow into oil will flow into the cooler. And these 2 ports don't matter. It doesn't matter which lines go to which port here, they just need to make it to the cooler. And that's our end result basically. Alright, so before I put the new lines on, I just pulled off the last of the old lines. These were Aeroflow 400 series, and they were really disappointing, and I do not recommend them at all. They were cracking and failing even after only being about a year old and hardly getting any use. So yeah, I'd avoid it, and that's, you know, that's the way it is. You got to learn these things. You try hose until you find the right stuff, and as far as I'm concerned, this is not the right stuff. Just went and got a fresh blade for the knife, because it's going to make life a lot easier when cutting these hoses. Now this next one's one of the hardest, because we have to get under a bunch of fuel lines, or around a bunch of fuel lines, and into the block. we go, that looks pretty neat. We've got the two lines running down. So the line on the right goes into the thermostat block. And we can't really see it down there. And then this line on the left goes down into the engine in there. You see, we've got an arrow on the centralmost hose, so that's the inlet, and then the hose to the left of that is the outlet, and that's this hose that comes up here and goes into our filter. Inlet into the filter, outlet from the filter, down into the thermostat. You get the gist. Let's continue on with the hoses down underneath. Now I've reinstalled the front radiator ducting because the lines to go to the fittings here need to go through this inner edge to meet up with the thermostat up under there. Yeah, so I've put this on. I'll mark out a hole, drill it, or cut it with tin snips or something, and then I can put the hoses in. So should be fairly straightforward. Too bad considering it was a drill, but I'll give it a quick file and that'll be about good enough, I think. So you can see we need to run the line from here to our fitting that's hanging out here, and the one that's slightly inboard to the second fitting on the thermostat. Now it doesn't matter which two of these go to which two of these. So given that there's a lower and an upper here and a lower and an upper here, it makes sense to join the two lowers together and the two uppers together. That will make for fairly neat lines, and we should be able to keep them sort of parallel to one another, and I'll be able to tie them together with something. You can see they're lined fairly well out of the way of the wheel. The wheel's going to well and truly hit things like the anti-roll bar before it hits the lines, but nonetheless it's good to keep them tucked up, and so I can tie them to this radiator lower brace if I have to. So even that is acceptable without needing anything like this, because I did consider running a set of these to get that tighter radius, but I don't think we'll need it. We're able to sort of get a fairly gradual curve that's definitely not going to get hit by the wheel at full lock or anything. So if we cut the line and put it at that point, I think that's acceptable. Well, that's the job done. You can see now sort of a recap on lines. We've got our two lines going from the filter. One goes into the block, one goes into the thermostat, and then down here we've got the two lines coming out of the thermostat into the cooler, and then the cooler itself. Pretty happy with the result, actually. I will go back over things and just triple check any lines that are going to rub or anything. I'll tie them apart just to make sure that nothing's going to cause any damage. And like this hole here, maybe I'll need to open it up once this front shroud is properly mounted. I'll make sure that there's no sharp edges that are going to cut any of the lines. Likewise here, actually that line's pretty much perfect. Nothing can touch it. This line, it gets a bit tight next to the fuel line here, so perhaps we'll need to readjust this just slightly, or maybe I might just wrap it in some old rubber hose or something just to keep it protected. But pretty much that is a job done. One topic that I didn't cover, that I'm sure some of you are going to mention, is there's no AN fittings, and it's not Teflon braided hose and blah blah blah. This stuff works. I've used it for years. I'm really happy with it. You just got to get the right hose. As I mentioned, that Aeroflow 400 series wasn't good enough for me. I've been using push lock fittings with hose clamps for a long time. They've always served me really well. I'm really happy to use them and continue to use them. The fittings aren't excessively expensive like AN fittings are. The hose is, if you buy the right stuff, it is fairly costly, so it's not cheap hose. I enjoy working with it much more than AN fittings. I just think that they're overcomplicated for this sort of application. It's a budget build. You don't need to use AN fittings. But anyway, that's just a little thing I thought I'd better mention, because I know someone in the comments is going to say something about it. Now, of course, there will be a few things I do need to do to finish this job off. First of all, I'll top up the oil, because obviously there's no oil in the cooler itself, and so I'll need to make sure that that thing is actually full of oil, and that's going to obviously use some. Likewise, the lines and things all need to get now primed with oil, so the car's going to need a little extra oil, probably, I don't know, half a litre perhaps. I'll also go over all the fittings and things, and then of course the last thing to do is then run the car up and check for any leaks or any of those clamps are a bit too loose, or any little issues that may come up with all the work we've just done. So that's the last thing I'll do, but I won't bore you with the details on exactly doing that. Well, anyway, folks, that's it for this video on the oil cooler. I'm pretty happy with the result. Went in fairly well. It's going to work, and it's going to do the right job, and it's always important to use the right parts for this sort of thing, particularly when you're talking track cars. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.